Welcome everybody to our session for this afternoon. This conference was made possible in large part to our generous sponsors and of course our presidential sponsors Netfile and Granicus. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ashton Gout. I am the Member Services Director for CCAC, as well as the Athenian Leadership Dialogue Coordinator, your volunteer coordinator, and other hats that I wear for the association. It's nice to see all of you. I wish we were all in person. In addition, I'm currently the Deputy City Clerk for the City of Palm Springs until this Thursday, and I will be entering my new role as the Deputy City Clerk for the City of Fontana next week. I am very pleased to be here today with you all, as well as our co-workers, Arron Brown and Flinn Fagg, who you guys will get an opportunity to hear from for today's session on how to understand and prevent myopia and think like a department head. So really quick, just to go over today's session, attendance is mandatory in order for you to get those points. CCAC will be periodically reviewing the participation list to ensure that attendance was met for the full duration of the session. So please stay on in order to get those points. The session materials and the learning assessment for each session can be found on the conference website, which is www.clerksrock.com. Under the course description, the certificates of attendance will be provided after the conference. If for any reason there's an urgent need for a certificate, please contact our president, Anthony Mejia. And just to go over a few things, we won't be having a break because it's only a 2-hour session. So we will be ending today's session at 3 o'clock. So let me jump into our speakers to get you to meet them a little bit. First, I'm going to start with Flinn Fagg. He joined the City of Palm Springs in September of 2014 and currently serves as the Director of Development Services. He previously served as the Planning Director for the City of Las Vegas and as an urban planner and designer for several cities in Florida. Flinn has been a member of the American Planning Association, APA, since 1994 and received his AICP certificate in 1998. He served on the board of the City Planning and Management Division of the APA from 2012 to 2016 and previously served as the director of the Southern Section of the Nevada chapter of the APA. Flinn is a graduate of the University of Oregon, where he earned a Bachelor of Architect degree. He obtained his Master of Architect degree at the University of Miami, specializing in urban design and traditional neighborhood development. In his spare time, he actively competes in cycling, swimming, and running events. Arron Brown is a government executive that has made a career of thinking differently. With a multidisciplined education and background, he is constantly on the search for the way to build a better mousetrap. With 5 associates, a dual major, bachelor's in business administration and informational technology management, an MPA, and numerous private and public certifications, he is always learning and is passionate about sharing his knowledge and experience with others. To jump into this session for this afternoon for you, in a perfect world, you can develop the skills you need to successfully lead a division or department over time. Those skills can then be used as a foundation to successfully lead an entire organization. Sometimes we do not get that opportunity, and by our own choice or someone else's, we are thrust into a leadership position. Let's say you wake up on a Monday morning and you are now the department head. What do? How do you accomplish your tasks and goals, especially when your peers are involved? This course is designed to help participants understand the motivations and tendencies of peer department heads and how to use the information to better affect change. Additionally, we will delve into thinking like a leader and managing up. Please give a warm welcome to Flinn Fagg. Go ahead and take it over, Flinn.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me and Arron here at your conference this afternoon. Actually, we owe the honors to Arron, who put this session together and invited me to tag along. I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation first. I'm someone who basically learned on the job. Arron is someone who studied this, so I'll give you the bad experience first, and he'll give you the professional experience or the professional viewpoint afterwards. So Arron, I'll let you pick up the pieces afterwards. One of the first technical things that you need to learn as a director is how to use PowerPoint and how to use Zoom. So with that, I'm going to attempt to do this and share my screen with you now. And let me just move to get back there. Okay, we did that with barely any hiccups whatsoever. So as Ashton introduced us, we're going to talk about how to understand and prevent myopia. Another way to talk about that is how to prevent silos between departments in a municipal government or in an organization. And then also we're going to talk about how to think like a department director. And so you have two department directors who probably think very differently. So we'll give you very different points of view in terms of how to do that. I've divided my presentation up into two parts. Part one, I'm going to talk about the characteristics, the values, the role of a director. And then secondly, I'm going to talk about how departments should interact with one another. What are the skills that you need to deal with other departments? So with that, let's go ahead and start with part one. All of a sudden, you are moving from a supervisor role or a management role to director. Are you ready? Are you ready to take on those responsibilities? Are you someone who's going to cower behind the desk and avoid it? Or are you ready to take the crown and go down the runway and accept the honor and the responsibility and move on? In my experience, the first city that I worked for straight out of grad school was the city of Naples in Florida. And I had worked there for about 4 years, and surprisingly, our department director quit. The next night, I had a phone call from the city manager. He never called me at home, so I knew this was important. And he said, Flynn, what do you think about applying for the position of director? And again, I had only had 4 years of experience with the municipal government, only 4 years in planning. I had come over from architecture. And while I had learned a lot in those 4 years, I just felt like I wasn't ready. There were other people in the department who had more experience than me, and I just felt like I was way too young. In some ways, I feel bad that I turned that opportunity down, but I knew that I just was not prepared. Moving on, a number of years later, a number of governments later that I had worked for, I moved to Las Vegas and started out as an urban design coordinator, eventually working my way up to a management position. Same thing happened. One Friday, had a call from the department director. She was going to retire. And Monday morning, had a call from the city manager asking me to take on the role as the acting director. This time, I was prepared and I was ready to go. One of the unique things about the city of Las Vegas is within 3 weeks of accepting that position, we modified our schedule from a 5-day work schedule to a 4-day work schedule, trying to coordinate with all of our applicants and our developers in that change in our schedule. We moved to a new location, so I had to arrange for all of our systems to be transferred, all of the equipment to be transferred. And then a couple of weeks after that, they gave me the licensing division to manage in addition to the planning department. So within the first month, I was swamped with a number of different opportunities. But again, I felt like I was ready at that time to take all of that on. Question is, what did I do in between that first opportunity and the second when it came up? Number one, I actively pursued professional certification so that I felt that I had the tools I needed to be an effective planning director. Secondly, I looked for leadership opportunities so that I could grow myself as a leader, not only in terms of looking for training courses in leadership, but also looking for other roles within the department that I could take on that would help me to grow and develop. So for example, in the city of Las Vegas, my first management position was in what we call the current planning division, which is over the planning commission and over plan review and things like that. After spending a couple of years there, I asked to be transferred to the long range planning division, where I was responsible for the city's master plan. By changing positions within the department, I learned all aspects of planning functions. And so when the opportunity came to become the director, I knew exactly what was going on in the divisions within the department and felt like I could adequately manage those. Another important thing that I did was to take on additional responsibilities. That not only did I look at what my job duties were, I wanted to learn the responsibilities of other functions as well. And so that's another critical thing that helps give you the background and experience that you might need to move up in your career. And then finally, learn all aspects of what you do. In the planning division as a manager, I never touched the budget because that was something the director always did. And I finally got around to asking her, you know, I'd like to understand how the budgeting process works. What do I need to know? How do I adequately manage my department? So she gave me responsibilities over the budget so I would learn that process as well. So again, think about the things that you don't know and ask your director, ask your supervisor, this is what I want to learn. This is what I want to do. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, they're going to help you in achieving that. So in terms of thinking about your progression, think of the things that you need to do to get ready. The question comes up, what's the difference between being a manager, a supervisor, and being a director or a leader? How are they different? Well, you can think of it this way. Let's think about sailing a ship. If you're a manager, you're basically the one who's responsible for keeping the ship on course. So you make sure that the sails are out when the wind is blowing, someone's got the rudder, and you try to prevent your crew from mutinying. So those are the things that you do as a manager. When you get to be a director or a leader, your role grows substantially. That not only do you keep the ship on course, you're also the one who identifies the destination. You identify the ways that you're going to get there. And most importantly, you motivate your crew to work with you in reaching that goal or that destination. And so in terms of thinking about the difference, taking on the role of a director, your responsibilities have expanded. And so you need to get out of the mode of just managing, keeping things on course, but thinking about how am I going to improve things? How am I going to get us to our next destination and what's next for us? So those are some critical differences that you need to think about as you take on that responsibility. The next question becomes, what kind of a leader are you going to be? I don't know if you all have been in a job interview and you've had the question, describe your management style. This is something that I used to get in an interview, and it just used to make me chafe because it's hard to kind of describe what you feel is important about management in a simple phrase that everyone will understand. If you go through all of the materials on leadership and organizational behavior, you'll see these catchphrases like I'm results oriented, or, you know, I'm a democratic manager, or, you know, I'm a collaborative director. Those types of things. And, you know, some of us just don't think that way. Rather, when trying to respond to that question, what made it easier for me to think about my management style was to think about what I value as a leader, what is important to me. And that's something that I developed not only seeing other leaders, but as I took on responsibilities, what should I be doing as a leader? There are 4 things that I value, and your values might be a little bit different than mine. I'm sure Arron's going to offer some perspective in terms of what he values, but here are some ones that I typically use when people ask me what my management style is. And these are the values I talk about. The first thing I talk about is the provision of services. What is the department's responsibility in terms of what we provide to the public, to our customers? And then also, how do we provide customer service? So in terms of a planning department, what we think about is taking in zoning applications and doing those types of approvals, doing plan review, and then also doing long-range planning. So one of the things I value is being able to turn around those applications relatively quickly, trying to get people through the process in a speedy manner. We also think about customer service in terms of how quickly we respond to customers. And so that's one of the values that I have that I think is important in terms of a management style, is thinking about how you relate to your customers and how you provide customer service. The second thing I think about is both the welfare and the productivity of my staff. First, talking about welfare, it's important that your staff members also have the opportunities to grow and progress professionally. And so think about the things that would be important to them, such as certification in terms of professional certification, taking on additional responsibilities and giving them responsibilities. As part of that, also think about the productivity of staff. That one of the things that you need to be concerned about is, are you able to manage the workflow and how are you doing that? Hopefully you're sitting down and visiting with your supervisors, you're visiting with your staff members, you're coaching them, you're giving them support, you're checking on them in terms of their productivity and how they're getting things done and what they need, the tools that they need to get things done. So another thing that I value as a leader is guaranteeing the welfare and looking after the productivity of staff. The third thing is about advancing the organization. Again, getting away from the idea of just keeping the ship on course. You need to think about where you're taking the ship. In the planning profession, things are always changing. We're learning more about how people react with cities and interact with cities. There's always changes in state law. And so we need to think about how our organization grows and progresses. And the way we do that is through setting goals or setting a work plan or a strategic plan for the department. And so another thing that is an important part of your values and your skills as a leader is how you advance your organization or how you progress your organization.
Flynn, not
Yes.
to interrupt, but we're having some difficulty hearing you. We've gotten a few people that are saying it's going in and out. So if you could just raise your mic just a little bit, I think that might correct it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Hopefully this will be better now.
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay,
What?
sorry about that.
Madison, M-A-D-I-S-O-N.
Sorry, I just want to make sure everyone who's participating, if you can make sure that your mics are muted. It should only be Flynn that has his mic unmuted. Go ahead, Flynn. Sorry about that.
Okay. Moving on to the fourth value, the next one that is also important, at least to me, is how the department interacts with other departments. What is the relationship with other departments? And then what is the relationship of the department with the city council? How do you coordinate those things? So in terms of working with other departments, I think that's one of the critical things, and Arron and I will go into this in a little bit more depth. But for us to get anything done as a city, we need the departments to work together well, because departments support each other. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's one of the critical things that you need to think about as a director. And then also looking at the city council in terms of how you interact with the city council. It's very important that you be responsive to the city council, that you provide them with the information that they need to make decisions for the community at large. So you as a director play an important role in providing them the information they need and coordinating with other city departments in achieving the goals and the mission of the city. So, you know, you could put a catchphrase on what those four things are. I don't know that I could, but those are the things that I value. So as you're thinking about your management style, think about what you value and what is important as a director. One of the things that many people want to do once they become a director is to look at change. This is both a good thing and sometimes it can be a bad thing. There's a temptation to instantly make changes and to change everything about the organization, that oftentimes we have an idea of what is wrong. But when you're coming into an organization brand new, it's important that you assess what is successful about the department first before you move forward with changes. One of the things that I did when I came to the city of Palm Springs, I was coming into a brand new organization. I didn't know much about the city. I didn't know much about the department or the individuals in the department. Was I met with everyone in the department, and I asked them what they thought were some of their, key things that they did well. What were some of the things that they thought needed improvement? Because they're the ones who are working in it day to day. They typically will know what is wrong with the organization. They also know what can help to make it right. And so I think one of the first things that's important before you make changes is to understand what really needs to be done. And then secondly, protect what you're already doing well. If there's some aspect of your customer service that your customers really like, then continue doing that. If there are things your customers don't like, then those are the things that you need to look at changing. Just as important as interviewing your staff, also listen to your customers, and even more importantly, listen to other departments. Other departments will have an opinion about how effective your department is and how easy it is to work with your department. That's an important relationship for you to cultivate. And so listen to the other department directors in terms of things that you could do better. I think that's an important aspect before you consider changes. Arron, I think you're going to talk a little bit more about going from good to great and change and things like that. So I'll let you go ahead and flesh that out just a little bit more. As you become a director, it's very easy to get wrapped up in the fact that, it's all about you. I've got some news for you. It's not always just about you. You need to think about your role in a larger organization. Your goals for the department should be carefully aligned with the priorities of the city council and the city manager. So as you're thinking about charting your destination, think about the destination that the city council has established or your city manager has established. So as you look at change, as you look at charting your course, think about how your goals align with that of the greater city organization. I'm going to talk about a couple of things that it's a little bit difficult to teach, but it's something that I've learned from other directors and something that I've learned from experience. The first thing is about timing and strategy. As a department director, you need to think strategically about accomplishing goals and implementing projects. There may be projects that you want to get underway, but maybe it's not time for that yet. For example, when I first came to the city of Palm Springs, I learned instantly that we had no ability to submit plans and applications electronically or online. I just assumed that would be something that a city in California would have. Coming from Florida and from Nevada, that's something that we had there, and so I expected that to be the case in Palm Springs. Sadly, it wasn't. I struggled with that goal for the first couple of years until we had a new IT director come on board, and then it became a possibility to implement that goal. So we're happily underway with doing an online submittal system now, thanks to Arron and his crew. But again, you need to think about how you're going to accomplish those goals, and sometimes you have to wait until the appropriate timing to get things done. So timing and thinking strategically is very important in terms of doing that. Again, you have to ask yourself, what are council's priorities? Your goals for the next year may not be on council's list. Look at what they're thinking about, and maybe that causes you to re-rank your priorities or when you're going to get things done. So that's the first thing that I would look at. Let me give you an example in terms of thinking strategically and getting projects accomplished. In the city of Las Vegas, we had as a goal in the city's master plan to make our neighborhoods more walkable, to make it possible for residents to walk from their homes to either schools or to restaurants or other amenities, and to do so safely. We suffered from not having enough sidewalks, bicycle lanes, or having an inhospitable pedestrian environment. And so as part of that, we decided to do what we called walkable community plans. So looking at an existing neighborhood and how you could retrofit it with sidewalks and bicycle lanes to make it more walkable. We started out by identifying one area within each of the 6 council wards. In Las Vegas, the city council members each had their own district. And so we wanted to be very even-handed about how we did that. And so we identified an area within each of the council wards. So one of the council wards that we were working in had a prime location where there was a nice commercial hub that was immediately adjacent to a number of residential neighborhoods, that with some minor additions of sidewalks, removing some gates in a certain area and doing other things, it could become quite walkable. We went through the process of meeting with residents and talking about where they would like to walk and what they would want to see, how they wanted their neighborhood to be organized, etc., and developed the plan. Once we had the plan developed with the input of the neighborhood, we then went to the city council to get the plan adopted. As I was meeting with the council member from that ward, he said, you know, I just don't think it's really that important to have walkable neighborhoods, and I just can't see allocating the funding for it. Here we had been working on the plan for 6 months. We had, reached out to all the neighborhoods, and we just didn't have the council support for it. However, in one of the other council districts, we had a council member who was just waiting for us to come to his district and begin starting the walkable community plan process. And so instead of wasting time trying to convince a council member that this was the right thing for his neighborhood, we went to the next one where it was desired and where we could then implement it rather easily. So in terms of thinking strategically and looking back at that experience, while we were trying to do the right thing in being even-handed in our approach, look at where there is the need or the desire to get it done, and you can move there first. So one of the great lessons that you learn in implementing projects is thinking, do I have the support from this? Where is the support coming from? And then trying to align your work plan with that support. Thinking about strategically in terms of how we implement projects, as in any California city, affordable housing is a huge concern for us. And while we've made small steps in terms of trying to advance those projects, we've had some support from state legislation, which has made the approval process for affordable housing projects easier. But what we enjoy here in the city of Palm Springs right now is a planning commission and a city council who see this as a priority. And so we're very lucky in terms of now we can go ahead and make changes to our zoning code to encourage the development of appropriate affordable housing and have the support of the planning commission and city council, rather than in other jurisdictions where there might be opposition to that and you'll encounter barriers along the way. And so this is a case where you have the support of your city council. And so it's important that you move forward as quickly as you can and getting things in place to take advantage of that priority and of that goal of the community. So again, thinking strategically is something that's important to do as you're making your plans. The next skill that I try to teach my staff members, but is kind of a difficult one to pick up sometimes, is how to anticipate things, or as I call it, how to predict the future. Sometimes that's a little difficult, but other times you have clues along the way that help you to anticipate that. As a department director, it's important to learn to anticipate what are going to be the questions or the concerns or even the roadblocks that are going to come up as you're moving about advancing your work plan. Here in the city of Palm Springs, when I'm at a city council meeting, I feel like I'm a contestant on Jeopardy and we're playing How to Stump the Planning Director. I have a city council member who all the time will have questions for me that I just know he's going to try and stump me on one of those questions. And so I make sure that I'm prepared in terms of knowing my information, and then also knowing his background and what his concerns are. I can generally anticipate what he's going to ask and have an appropriate response ready. That's not always the case, but again, preparation is one of the key skills that you need to have in order to be able to anticipate questions and concerns. To give you another example, cell towers are always kind of problematic as we're taking them through the approval process before the Planning Commission. Our Planning Commission has concerns in terms of where the cell towers are located, what they're going to look like, what is the impact going to be on the community, and even more importantly, is the cell tower even really necessary? So while our zoning code doesn't require it, one of the things that we started asking our applicants to do is to provide coverage maps of what will be the coverage without the cell tower, what will be the coverage with the cell tower. By being able to anticipate the questions of the Planning Commission, addressing those questions up front, we're able to get an application through the process more quickly and address the impacts more quickly as well. So by being able to anticipate those questions, again, we can move things through a process more quickly. It's the same thing with city council questions. When we can anticipate those questions or those issues up front, it gives them the information that they need to make decisions. And in doing that, they can also proceed with their agenda and with the agenda items themselves. So the skill of being able to anticipate questions is an important one as a director. I suppose all of us, to a certain degree, have learned how to manage our managers, that we've learned the important things that they need to do their job, and we provide those for them. We also help them help us get our job done. As a director, one of the things you need to learn is how to let your staff manage you as well. Being a director takes a certain degree of humility, that you need to be receptive to comments, you need to be receptive to criticisms, both from your staff, from other directors, from the public. And so it does take a certain degree of humility. You just need to just get used to that. I had a staff member in the city of Las Vegas who was in charge of employee engagement within the department. So in addition to looking at ways to engage our staff members through social activities, she also looked at awards for our staff members and things like that. What she did with me was she said, you know, Flynn, I'm going to sit down with you every 6 months and I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong. And so she was very good at managing her manager and identifying the things that I needed to do to support the staff members in the department more successfully. And at first that was a little bit hard to take, but when I realized that her intent was to help me be a better director, to help me support my staff members more effectively, I realized the importance of those sessions and made sure that we had time to chat and to do those things. So again, as a new director, you need to be a little bit humble and be able to take some criticism or some comments from your staff periodically. So another thing to think about. With that, let's move on to part 2 in terms of how to prevent myopia or only being focused on your department. We also call that building silos, where you only think about what your role in the organization is without thinking about how that impacts other organizations. I used to teach a Citizens Academy of Planning class, and one of the things I told them, because they don't know exactly what all different city departments do, I had them liken it to a department store, that cities function to a certain degree like a department store. So you'll have a shoe department, And the manager of the shoe department is going to know everything about the shoes that they carry. They know the dress shoes, they know the athletic shoes, they know the sandals, they know everything. They know which manufacturers are the best, which ones are going to be the longest lasting, which ones are the cheapest, which ones are the most expensive. They'll know everything about the shoe department. If you ask them a question about what's in the housewares department, they're not really going to be able to help you. It's a completely different discipline. They're not going to know about cookware. They're not going to know about small electrics. So it's a completely different department. They're not really going to know much about each other. The thing is, from the public's viewpoint, they don't think of you as the shoe department or the houseware department. They think of all of you as Macy's. You're a store. I'm going to go get things at the store, and if I have to return them, I'm going to return them to the store. And they're not going to be so concerned about what department does what. In a similar vein, we as department directors need to think about the store and not just our individual department. And so in terms of the store, the department store, we need to think about how it's performing overall, because the success of the department store isn't just because you have a shoe department that, its sales are off the charts and everyone else is suffering. You have a successful department store because all of the departments are operating successfully and providing the goods that people want and need. And so as you think about an organization, think like a department store where there's multiple departments, but you together are one organization and people see you as one organization. Oftentimes we're frustrated in city departments when a member of the public will call us and say, Flynn, you're the planning director. I have an issue with my economic development grant. Well, that's not my department, but they don't care that it's not my department. I need to get them to the proper department and make sure that they have the support and the questions answered. So again, we need to think outside of the realm of our department and think as a larger organization. One of the key things in municipal government is that you never end up doing anything by yourself. You need the help and support of other departments to assist you. So as clerks, you probably know about producing agendas for city council and other boards and commissions. A city council agenda doesn't happen by itself. When I think about agenda items in terms of what I need to get on the city council agenda, I usually start off with a public hearing notice. And so I've got to coordinate with the clerk's office on that and making sure that they get that in time, that it's translated into the various languages that we need to have it translated to, making sure that it gets to the newspaper, or if it's a mailed notice, making sure that we have the notice that's going out in the mailers. Preparing the staff report, one of my staff members will prepare the report. I'll review it, I'll sign off on it, I'll give it to the assistant city manager. He'll review it, sign off on it. It will go to the city clerk. There's attachments. I need to make sure the attachments get to the city clerk. As we're getting ready for the city council meeting, there's a presentation. I need to get that to IT. I need to produce copies of the presentation and get that to the city clerk so they can distribute it to the council members. So there's a lot of people who participate in a city council agenda. And it's not just any one department's job. It's all of our jobs to make sure that we do that in a successful manner, that we get everything together. So I need to make sure that the city clerk has the support that they need in terms of getting my items on the agenda. I'm not leaving that up to them to do. And, they give me support in terms of helping me with the public hearing notices and doing things like that. So again, you never do anything by yourself. In the planning world, as we think about the adoption of plans and codes and things like that, again, it's the same. We don't do it by ourselves. Typically, we need to hire a consultant, so we have to work with our procurement department in terms of doing that. In terms of going out to the public, we sometimes need the help of our communications division in getting the word out to the public. We need members of the public to participate in the formulation of that plan. We need other departments to assist us in terms of reviewing the information that we've received. How does that impact other plans that we have? We need the support of the city council members, the planning commission, etc. So again, in a city government, no one does anything by themselves. And so we need to think about the fact that we all work together, and that it's not just my plan, but it's the city plan. And there's a lot of people who have assisted me in putting that plan together. As you think about this, you begin to realize that relationships are absolutely critical in terms of working together. One of the most important things that I've learned while during COVID is Game of Thrones taught me everything I need to know about relationships and strategic alliances. So I've never watched the show before, and because we had an immense amount of time to kill, and Netflix and HBO was there, we went through Game of Thrones from season 1 to season 8 over the course of about 2 weeks. What you'll see in that show is that there are groups of people who may not like each other, but they rely on each other to get to their ultimate goal. And so they compromise a little bit along the way. If you give me this, then I'll give you that. And that's how they get things done. Hopefully in a city, we can do the same thing, but without the bloodshed that comes along with Game of Thrones. So again, just a way to think about your relationships. Sometimes those relationships are unexpected. I'll give you an example. When I was with the city of Las Vegas in a management position, I was encouraged to take the county's leadership course. And what that did was put together managers from a variety of different municipal organizations and civic organizations from across the valley. And we went through essentially a 6-month leadership course. As part of that, we had a number of projects to work on. So we would be paired up with other individuals in the program. And I was paired up with a woman from the Southern Nevada Health District for a number of projects that we worked on. And at first, it seemed like an unusual relationship that, I build cities, she keeps kids from eating Doritos. So what in the world would we ever have in common, the two of us? But as we got to talking and as we got to working together on a number of projects in that leadership course, one of the things that we discovered is that in terms of providing fresh food to residents, they need to have access to that. And so they need grocery stores that carry a full line of fruits and vegetables. Who is responsible for dictating where grocery stores go? Well, that's the planning department. And so she and I eventually worked together on a food access policy guide where we looked at neighborhoods across the city of Las Vegas, determined which ones were underserved in terms of access to fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh foods, and developed a plan where we looked at commercial zoning and how we could incentivize grocery stores in certain areas that were underserved. So sometimes as you're thinking about relationships, some of your strategic alliances may be unexpected, but it's important to look for those opportunities wherever you can. Think about your relationships with other departments. I've given you a couple of examples in terms of how other departments work with planning in order to help us get things done. We need to think about how we help them in terms of getting their goals and objectives accomplished as well. What is helpful is looking at what are the priorities of the other departments. Typically what happens is when you do your annual budget, you'll often see what other departments are planning. And sometimes what they're planning aligns with what you're planning as well. For example, as I talked about, we're looking at moving to an electronic format for application submittals. The city clerk's department here in the city of Palm Springs is moving to a new system for electronic document storage. I'm going to piggyback on top of that because I'm going to need a place to store my documents, and it's helpful if we do it all in the same system. So again, being mindful of the goals and priorities of other departments gives you the opportunity to collaborate and so that you have a system that works for the entire city as you implement those types of things. Giving you another example, engineering division, sustainability division have much different roles, much different responsibilities. But our Sustainability Commission was working on a pedestrian safety plan. In order to get that plan implemented, we need the engineering department who's responsible for capital projects to help implement. And so Sustainability Division engaged with the engineering division in helping them to develop and adopt the plan, and then scheduling the improvements that were necessary as part of that plan. So again, even though relationships may be unlikely, sometimes you help each other get things done. And so think about those relationships and cultivate those relationships. The last thing I'm going to focus on is being a bureaucrat. Having come from the public sector, from an architectural background, from the private sector, from an architectural background, going to the public sector, one of the things I never really wanted to be or never really had an interest in was being a bureaucrat. I was used to, develop a plan, you get the plan done. And I've taken that same approach throughout my career, that I'm not interested in just holding things up because we can, but rather I'm more interested in getting things done. So that's, again, a value that I have. One of the things that we sometimes do is we create artificial barriers. We do that for the public by having, an application deadline that it has to be submitted at least 30 days in advance of such and such a date. Sometimes we do that with other departments too, and we need to think about that. Sometimes those deadlines are important to help us get things done, but look and see which ones are really necessary. Again, as I think about relationships with other departments, our clerk's department has been very, very helpful in terms of assisting us when we have a last-minute public hearing notice. They'll give us our options, they'll support us. They do a terrific job in doing that. Because they do that for us, I feel the need to support them as well. That sometimes when they have public hearing notice mailers, that includes 700 pieces of mail or 1,000 pieces of mail, I'll have my staff step in and assist them with that mailing. So again, look to help each other. Don't put up barriers in between each other. So that's something I think that's critical to look at. Another thing is to think about your internal customer service the same as you think about your external customer service. So how I deal with members of the public and how I deal with other departments should be just as responsive. And so it's important to value those relationships, to be responsive, and to assist when you can. The ultimate bottom line in thinking about your role in a municipal government is that we help people do stuff. We don't prevent people from doing stuff, but rather we help people do stuff, and we help them do it in the proper way. So we help them adhere to our codes and our regulations. We help get them through processes so that they in turn can build and develop our community and enrich our community life. And so as you think about your role as a department director, think about helping people do stuff. Just to wrap things up, as you think about your role as a department head, think about the relationships that you have and how you nurture those relationships. Think about finding common priorities that you have with other department heads, with your city council members, with your public. Think about your goals and your values as a leader in terms of how you advance those goals and what you value, what is important to you. And then look at aligning your projects and your work plans. Think about that, how that aligns with other departments. And then finally, assess your role within the larger organization. Think of yourself like a department store. What is your role as the shoe department, and how do you interact with the other departments? So that concludes my remarks. We can either take questions now or turn it over to Arron if you'd like to get started.
Flynn, so we do have a few questions. I figured it might just be best to give them to you before we jump into Arron's presentation. So when you were talking about your staff, that kind of gave you pointers on what was going wrong. Did anything that they said to you surprise you?
Yes and no. To a certain degree, hopefully you have an understanding of what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. I know that one of my weaknesses is I'm not a good communicator, that I think I'm communicating and I don't really do that. So when Carmen would sit down with me and tell me, okay, you need to put this message out in such and such a time frame, you need to do that. That wasn't a surprise for me. But there are some things that would come up periodically that would surprise me, that while I thought I was giving someone additional responsibility that they wanted, later to discover that no, they didn't really want that. So occasionally things like that would come up. And so you always need to reassess your relationship with your staff members and make sure that they're getting the support and they're getting the responsibilities that they need and what they want.
Thank you. And then we have another one. So as you join a new city, staff typically is very hesitant, to be honest, about improvements and kind of just change. How did you deal with that coming in and kind of taking over a new office?
Your relationship with your staff at the very beginning is very critical, that they feel that they can trust you. And so you have to establish that feeling of trust with them. That goes back to communication in terms of being very open. So for example, starting off here in the city of Palm Springs, I made it very clear that I was going to sit down and talk to each member of the department so that they knew that that was coming and exactly what I was going to talk to them about, so that there weren't any surprises. Secondly, in terms of those individual conversations, it's important that you keep your word in terms of, I'm not going to change this, or I'm going to do this to support you. You need to follow through on those things. So those were some of the critical things that I needed to do right offhand to establish that relationship of trust, so they felt that they could come to me. And then also, when you have staff members come to you, don't share that with others unless they say that it's appropriate to do so. And so you've got to be very mindful of what they want to share with you versus what could be shared with the rest of the department, if that's something that's helpful.
Thank you. And just because I feel like it's a question that we all have, with COVID and staff working remotely and some going back full into City Hall and we're reopening, how would you like to describe how you're going to make sure that that morale stays up in your department as your staff starts to come together and moves past, the COVID time, so to speak?
Yeah. COVID has been a very unusual time, and I'm sure some of you have encountered that as a leader in terms of being able to motivate and support your staff when things are constantly changing. It's been something that's been very difficult. One of the things that we've done, and again, this is where other departments help us achieve our goals, is Arron's department, the IT department, has made it possible for staff members to work from home by having the equipment available for them and having the tools that they need that they can work from home effectively. So for example, even though we were working here in the office, some people, because of their health condition, found that it was more appropriate for them to work from home for a period of time. We had the equipment and the ability for them to do that so that they didn't have to take time off or things like that because of their concerns. And so it's the ability to support them, to be able to address their concerns. One of the things that my staff is going to be worried about, we haven't opened to the public yet, but we will here in the near future, is making sure that they have all the protections in place. One of the ways that we're doing that is we're using an app that our customers will use, so we only allow a certain number of customers into our lobby at a time so that we're not violating social distancing protocols, even though the vaccine has rolled out for the most part, but we're still looking at how we can protect our staff. So offering those protections, supporting them, I think are the ways that we help to keep morale up.
Okay, and then the last question we received was, how do you deal with managers that are overbearing and micromanage their teams?
That's always a difficult one. Micromanagement is a tough situation. Not that Arron and I would have any thoughts about that, but when you have a manager who is more involved with their staff than they need to be, sometimes you need to sit down one-on-one and counsel them and encourage them to let go of certain things. One of the things I like to do with my staff members is I sit down with them on a regular basis. I do an assessment with them in terms of their projects and things like that. But that also gives us an opportunity to look at their performance. When someone is micromanaging, sometimes they do it because they fear that if they don't, you are going to come down on them. And so partly it's your role as a director to help them understand that they don't need to micromanage if the staff member is performing. And so it's a matter of seeing how the staff member is performing, and then you in turn can encourage them to let go and let their staff do their jobs. One of the things that I didn't talk about as a value is valuing the professionalism of your staff members, that you need to recognize the capabilities of your staff members and let them run with it. And that's something that you need to encourage your managers to do, is to encourage the skills and the professionalism and the capability of their staff members.
Thank you, thank you. So thank you, Flynn, for all of your insight and your comments of how you've kind of grown through the ring here. Arron, it's off to you if you want to share your screen.
I shall. So when Anthony Mahee and I spoke about this in the beginning, and Anthony said it was 2 hours, I thought, oh, good Lord, I don't even want to hear myself speak for 2 hours. There's no way that's possible. And he said, if there's somebody you'd want to do it, then that makes sense as well. And Flynn made the most sense to me, because what he didn't talk about is Flynn was one of the department heads that, as a peer, I could come to him and get his input, and he would think, okay, how do the other departments do it? And that's why I kind of labeled this avoiding myopia, because I had a lot of department heads, and I'm sure you've experienced that as well, that have that myopic view of, it's my department, this is all I care about, that's the only world that I live in. Like Flynn said, it's the shoe department, and that's all I care about is shoes. But we have to come together as a city. So my wife would describe me as a well-educated redneck. I am from Southern Indiana. I, unfortunately for you, just got back from Tennessee this weekend, where I got my redneck batteries recharged. So when you see this SWA, that is Story Time with Arron. I come from a place where we don't use GPSs. We tell you, go to the red barn, turn left, you're going to come down 3 gas stations, turn right there. So it helps me paint a picture a lot better. So this is how my discussion is going to break down. You've set your sights on leadership role. Why? What do you do when you get there? And then we'll talk about a domain analysis. That'll be in both. And if you have questions, please ask them at the time. Ashton, if I am talking away and you want to get in, somebody jump in, tell me to get off my soapbox, because a lot of times those questions are going to be relevant for that time. And then we'll get into, if you're already a department head, and whether that's long-term or just recently, kind of go into that as well. So you think you can lead. That is a picture of me 4.5 years ago. I don't know if you're looking at me now, but this is what 4.5 years of leading a challenging organization looks like. So what is it that's motivating you to get there? Money, because what do you give up to get it? There was a point here working for the city of Palm Springs where we were so far behind on everything that I was working 80-hour weeks. And I'd laughed with a friend and with my wife, and I said, this is the least I've made per hour in a very long time. So what is it you're giving up for that money you set your eyes on? Is it power and prestige? Because that doesn't exist in a public institution. Every constituent outside of that door has far more power than any one of us do. Every constituent can send an email to council. That council member can jump on that, whatever that item is, and begin the steamroll process. And this is where my passion falls. So is it to be better or fix what is broken? That is what drives me every single day. I cannot see something broken and keep walking by it. I have to be a part of that fix. Or, and this happens too, I don't know, somebody had to do it. I was in the room, nobody else was in the room, so I'm doing it now. I'm also a Marine. So for those Marines that have heard this before, I apologize, but it really fits. When you get to that point and you want to lead, the best thing I can tell you is have a plan and make sure it doesn't suck, because that's what's going to get you through where you're going. No one says, let's go to Disneyland, and then turns around once they arrive. So getting to there is not your goal. And this is our first story time with Arron. My original position was IT director, and the city of Palm Springs went without an IT director for about 15 years. And when I got here, it was like I stepped into a time portal. The equipment, the practices, you name it, was 15 years old. Some of the IT staff had received certifications 15 years ago and sought nothing further from that point. The reason my position was created is Flinn and several other department heads were at a strategic retreat with council, city management, and one of the things that kept coming up was that IT had become an obstacle. They couldn't get things done. They weren't able to do the things they were able to do at other cities. People like Flinn had come from other cities and said, hey, this is the norm. We're not within that norm. And so the next year I had been hired. I had started really creating the department, and the same issues came up. They said, well, you know, we've got to get these technology issues fixed. And one of our council members said, we've fixed that problem. We hired Arron. And I felt like I was on a game show and all the spotlights pointed on me. And I was still relatively new. I didn't know, should I speak, should I not speak? But he could not have been more wrong when he said, we fixed it, we hired a person. So I decided, you know, what's the worst that can happen, right? I'll jump in here and kind of explain my perspective. My perspective was, you bought a car. So when you hired me, and it wasn't about me, it was about that position. You bought a car. Your ultimate goal was to drive from California to Florida. And all you did was buy a car. Now you've got a plan, you've got to fund, you've got to allocate whatever is needed. You need to staff, because I'm not driving to Florida on my own. I want to be able to change on and off with another driver. We've got to get gas. We've got to figure out lodging. There are many processes that have to be considered in something like that. And in the minds, at least of that council member and perhaps others, it was, we fixed the problem. Let's put a check mark and move on to the other item. And that's not how it works. So same thing if you take over a leadership role. You move into the clerk position, or maybe you're in a chief deputy clerk position, and you're not going to rest on that. You're going to remember what it was that got you there, what you want to change, what your passion brought you to. The next thing is, and before I go into this, I'm going to add one. Every single day, everything you do is an interview. So remember that as you're trying to get into that position. This discussion we're having right now could be an interview for me. If I want to be a city manager one day, I could very easily have any one of the city clerks that are part of this Zoom session on my interview panel. And if I lay an egg as I'm talking about this, the first thing they're going to think about when I get, oh, I remember that guy. That's Arron Brown. He laid an egg in that session we were in. So just understand, every single day is an interview. Do not wait until you get the job to lead. So as Flinn talked about, I came in as the IT director. I've been promoted to the deputy city manager. And that promotion really came about because of this. I sat down with our city manager for lunch one day and I said, I really appreciate the value you clearly have placed in me. I appreciate the different things you've recognized, but you're really making my life difficult. And the reason it was because he was constantly putting me in charge of projects that my peers were involved in, and oftentimes it was one of my peers that was taking the lead in it, and maybe things weren't going the way that he wanted. And my leadership style is really one to get things done. You can use all the buzzwords like Flynn had earlier, collaborative and democratic and all that, but for me, it goes to a point, and when I don't see the things operating the way that I need them to, I will get involved and try to push it to where it needs to go, and then withdraw again. And so his solution for that was moving me into a deputy city manager position, so that as I'm collaborating with the department heads and moving the projects along, I came with I guess a level of authority. Instead of saying the city manager said, which I'm sure every single one of you hears often, and sometimes it's actually true, but sometimes it's used as a tool, I was able to do that. The domain analysis is huge. You really need to understand the capabilities of your department. You need to understand where you as an individual are. The individual that was the IT manager before I took over as IT director, he had outright said, and I mean, this is a quote, my blood boils when I even think about it. He said, yeah, I was never qualified for this position, but what was I going to do? I hit the jackpot. They just kept paying me money. And he said that before he retired. He did that domain analysis and he was happy with where it was. Don't be that person. Do the domain analysis, look at where your responsibilities lie, what you can do, how you can get better, and set a course for that. This is my caution as a reminder. I'm about to violate everything I believe as a leader. I'm going to recommend some books to you. The reason I don't normally do this is because I have seen so many people read a leadership book and that becomes their management style until they read the next book. And it is utterly frustrating. There is not a book out there that will solve all of your problems. There's not a book out there that's going to tell you exactly how to lead every individual. So understand the recommendations I'm about to give you deal with other things. So The 12 Bad Habits That Hold Good People Back was a book that really changed how I managed my staff. And there's a caveat to this. If you read this book and you cannot identify a person or yourself in any one of these 12 habits, you need to ask a friend and they're going to tell you where you lie in these, because all of us have a little bit of some of these chapters. Crucial Conversations was very big for me because it just kind of reminds you that there are very important conversations that you can have with people, and it will completely affect your future. It'll affect their future. It'll affect your relationship and kind of how things go from that point. Or you could just chicken out, if you will, let it go and see maybe some inaction in the future. Crucial Accountability is a follow-up to that, kind of the same thing. It's about holding individuals accountable and understanding people inherently will let us down. I mean, it goes into your friends, your family, your peers, your bosses, and understanding that. Emotional Intelligence was, the first version was a very big game changer for me. I, like I said, grew up Southern Indiana, went to the Marine Corps. From the Marine Corps, I went into school and a food production company. It was my first job. And it was a hard adjustment for me to understand that you can't just tell people to do things and they just do it. Sometimes you've got to understand what motivates people, be a part of that motivation. And it really, again, changed how I understand what motivates my staff, what I can do to comment on what they're doing or reassure them, let them know where they stand. It was big. And the Fred Factor. The Fred Factor is a book that I make every single one of my staff members read, and it's important for anyone that is in a customer service job to do. So you'll notice I didn't have good to great in there, but I'm about to have a very important quote from it. Good is the enemy. Oh, let's block. There we go. Sorry. Good is the enemy of great, and that is one of the key reasons why we have so little that becomes great. We don't have great schools, principally because we have good schools. We don't have great government, principally because we have good government. Few people attain great lives, in large part because it's just so easy to settle for a good life. And I think that's something that you have to understand when you're going from that, or you're going for that leadership role. If you're walking into an organization where things are good, you need to evaluate that. No one's goal should be good. Great should be the goal. Now, if you're walking into an organization that is utterly dysfunctional, there have been a lot of issues. Jim Collins does not write a book for how to turn a flaming bag of poo into a diamond. That book doesn't exist. You really have to understand what is going on within that department and understand how you're going to function and what you can do to get better. Any questions at all on that portion before we move on to you're already there?
I haven't received any questions.
Okay.
I think you're okay to keep going.
Great. So now we'll kind of move into you're already the department head. And maybe you tried to get here, or maybe you just woke up here one day, but you're the leader now. So what do you do? And whether you're a department of one, which I know the city clerks departments range all over California, and some of you as city clerks end up with about 10 different jobs, and some of you have large departments, and you can really divide and conquer when it comes to what your goals are. How can I make an impact? The first thing that I recommend you understand, and this is again, whether you're brand new to, you've been a clerk for 20 years or you're brand new to this, you can revitalize an organization just as much as you can build a new one. What are the needs of the customers? Who do our customers need? What are the limitations and what is the impact on the organization? What do we do when we get there? So what are the needs of our customers? They need to do their jobs efficiently and effectively. And this one is written by the city of Palm Springs. Yesterday's needs do not necessarily match tomorrow's needs. And I think for city clerks, all of you understand that more than most. A little cliche bingo, walk a mile in their shoes and think outside of the box. And what I mean here is understand what your customers need. Are you an ally or an obstacle? I talked about how my first position here at the city was created, and that department was seen as an obstacle. No matter what was coming in, it was, they would use the word security to block it. I remember in my interview, the assistant city manager asked me about VPN and wondered why on earth the city of Palm Springs couldn't have VPN. I'm sure many of you on right now have been using a VPN process for remote access for 10 or 12 years. And I asked him to elaborate, and he said, well, the department said we can't use it because of security. And I remember my answer was the FBI has it, the CIA has it, the president's office has it. I don't know what the city of Palm Springs is doing that's so much more secure than what they're doing, but I'm very intrigued. And within a couple of months, we had VPN up and running because that department, their goal was to do less. And the way they could do less was use security as the obstacle for everything. And people like Flynn and their department suffered because of that. The number one insight in the relation is the relationship you build with your customer's leader. So for clerks, you may have department heads you're working with, council, the city manager, assistant city managers. It really varies, but it's all about the same thing Flynn said, relationships. And when you're dealing with departments, it's about that relationship with the individual leader. Southwest Airlines has an emerging leader development program where you have to work as a supervisor in 3 of the 5 areas. When I started out as the deputy executive officer for Riverside Superior Court, I had told my boss, who, to be frank, was an angry old curmudgeon. That was the best way I could describe him. I told him I was going to take the traffic clerk course because I wanted to see how everything worked. It was a 2-week course where you actually learn how to clerk a courtroom, and the last day, you are the clerk for that day. He thought it was the craziest thing. He didn't understand why we would do that, but I got so much perspective and was actually able to solve some of the real issues they had on friction of how things went slower and what we could do and processes we could automate, but nobody had ever gotten involved. So it's okay to roll up your sleeves, go to another department and say, hey, show me how you do this. How do you do your noticing? How do you make these changes to the items before they come to the agenda? Because sometimes you're going to have an expertise that is going to help them. We just deployed Laserfish, and Flynn was talking about that we can all be on the same page as long as people are communicating and going back and forth to help understand that. This is one of my favorite sayings from Colleen Barrett. We're in the customer service business. We just happen to provide airline transportation. And that quote to me goes across the board for any customer service organization. You could say, we're the customer service business. We just happen to be the custodian of records. We just happen to be the provider of IT support. Who do our customers need? Now, obviously, this is not an opportunity to discriminate or say, oh, my council needs somebody of this background. It's really understanding who you are as a person. Evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of your team. Evaluate the overall structure. Define the roles and responsibilities. And if you're a department of one, it's the same thing. Sit down and understand what your responsibilities are so you can know when you're coloring within those lines. Be honest with yourself and your management. I have had bosses who their answer is always yes. And something would come out and this is what we need and we need it quick. Yes, we can do it. And then they'd turn around and say, Arron, I need this by tomorrow. Well, that was never possible. They had no intention of really understanding what reality was. They just needed to please their bosses and say, yes, we can do that, comma, please like me. And it oftentimes just was not possible. So now I had to immediately let my boss down by reminding them of the restrictions that reality provides. And that kind of goes to the do not overpromise and underdeliver. Seek to understand. If I can give you any recommendations whatsoever to help the staff that you may have reporting to you feel valued, is take a moment when council or city manager or whoever it may be in your reporting structure says, I need this from you, give them time. Say, you know what? Let me check with whoever it may be, the chief deputy clerk. Let me check with the deputy clerk. They do this process every day. Let me see how long that would take. Or if you are that department of one and you know that, go back with them and say, you know what? We just did something like this 2 days ago. And in that 2 days, or it took 2 straight days. So that's the time I'm going to need to turn it around. You have to be able to do that so that your staff knows that you don't see them as a cog. You don't see them as just a piece of a function, that you value them, you value their input, and you want to make sure that they're able to get their jobs done and to be successful. Our number one job as leaders is to set our staff up for success. So you look at it from 2 perspectives. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the team? And what are the attitude and skills that are needed to meet your customer needs? I have absolutely had to move individuals on that were very capable, that were very technical, but didn't have the attitude to get the things done. Sometimes that attitude was infectious, and I would see negative things coming from positive people the more time they spent around those individuals. As an example, and there's your story time with Arron warning, I left the courts and went to work for a small $40 million a year budget church. And I went to work there because I had a friend who's a CFO. We had thought we were leaving California at the time, and I thought, sure, I'll come over and help. They had some infighting and problems. And on day one, the CFO came to me and said, I need you to fire this guy. He's in your department. He's been a problem. I discussed it with him to understand what the problems were that he had been, and they really couldn't identify anything. So I said, I'm not here to be a hatchet man. If you guys want to fire him, you go do it. If you want me to do it, give me a month to understand what the issues are. I spent about 2 to 3 weeks kind of understanding what was going on with that department. And that individual had immense promise. And the thing that was wrong with the department is there was no structure. The prior leader was an individual that would tell you, hey, you need to do this, give you no guidance, give you no avenue to really learn how to do it. And if you took too long or you made a mistake, he would take it back and say, never mind, you're not capable of this. And he would take it on. Now, mind you, he would repeatedly do that, so he never got anything done. Nobody in the department knew what their job was. They all saw it as just get things done was their job. So I was able to define very clear lanes and roles for each one of the individuals. I was able to provide the amount of guidance and direction that they needed. And then I was able to assess where the attitudes were, where the technical skills were, and I was able to get training for the individuals that needed some additional technical skills. Now, you fast forward about maybe a year later, that individual that I was supposed to fire on day one was promoted to IT supervisor. A year and a half later, when I left, he was promoted to the manager. He now works, he moved to Montana, works for a local tribe, and is really enjoying what he's doing. And it really was all because we needed to understand what the strengths and weaknesses were of the team. We needed to understand what the individuals needed and what we could do to motivate them.
Arron, I think this
Yep.
is like pause really quick for you to answer a question we received.
Absolutely.
So what is your advice if and when someone tries to keep you down or may actively undermine you because they may be jealous, do not regard you as an equal or a leader? Please note that this person is a part of the executive team, but often classified as just the clerk.
I can tell you that happened, and it happened to me so much so that I'm sure we can have that caveat. What we discussed in this meeting stays in this meeting, but if not, oh well. We had an HR director that was not my biggest fan, and he would often do exactly what you're talking about, where so much so that when my promotion to deputy city manager went to his desk, he lowered the title and sent it back and said, I recommend it be this. I hate these sayings, but you just have to be the bigger person. That's the only thing you can do, because every single day I wanted to verbally vomit on everyone around, and I would think, why do you let this go on? There wasn't an answer. It was, and sometimes it was so blatant. He would say, oh, that's not what I said. Well, other people were in the room and you knew that's exactly what he said. The only way you can get by is you make sure at all times your mental victory is only found in being the bigger person, because all it takes is one time for you to mess up, one time for you to react in the way that that person is trying so hard to get you to react for it to be over. And all they're going to do is say, see, I told you.
Definitely, definitely. Another question we received is, if there's a weakness in your team, but you have a full and decent staff, how do you recommend filling the gap?
It's that analysis. You've got to be able to understand. And if you're asking that question, you have to understand what that weakness is. I'm assuming that's where they're coming from, is they've identified that. You've got to be able to go to that individual, and you don't need to just throw it on them. But you got to be able to come in and say, hey, I value every individual on this team and what they do. I really think this team as a whole would be more successful if you had more experience, more education, more whatever it is in this area. And here is what I'm going to do, because you're the leader. It's your responsibility. Here is what I'm going to do to give you that path to get to where I think you should be. Now, if you've kind of created that path and you provide training opportunities for them, or you provide one-on-one educational opportunities, and they're still not getting there, now you go back into accountability and holding them accountable. You can't look at the entire team and say, oh, overall I've got a strong team except for this one person, because there is nothing more punishing to a high-performing individual than not holding a low-performing individual accountable.
Thank you. I think that's all for right now. So if you want to continue with your
all right.
Thank you.
So go to the next one. One of my favorite quotes, which everybody argues it either wasn't Einstein or it was, I don't care who it was. It's an awesome quote. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. Understand the strengths and weaknesses of your team. Understand what it is that you're asking of them. What are the limitations? Do you live in theory? Everybody's heard this, right? Well, in theory, this should work. In theory, this will happen. My running joke is, when I retire, I'm going to move to theory because everything works there. What is the DNA of your parent organization? So we're going through a transition. We had a 21-year city manager who really was a micromanager, really wanted to get involved in the weeds and to know everything that was going on. And sometimes it would be a lot of your own time, because you're not going to just tell him about the weeds. You've got to educate him on all of the background, except he really wanted things in 30 seconds. So it made for a very difficult change when you're trying to modify something. And so I really had to understand the DNA of our organization, of how I'm going to get things done. The first thing I needed to understand is I need to sometimes put a 30-minute meeting or a 30-minute presentation into 30 seconds. That's not an easy thing to do. So learning what made the organization move is what made my department more successful. Resources, budget, time, staff, all of these things are real, and they dictate what we do every single day. I can't imagine the amount of things that I would get done as an individual. I can't imagine the amount of things that my team would get done. I can't imagine the things the city would get done if somebody came in and said, your budget is unlimited, do whatever it is you want to do. Unlimited time plus unlimited money, unlimited results. But we deal with limited time and limited money. Therefore, we have limited results. You've got to keep that in mind. So when that request comes in, whether again it's city manager, council, or whatever, and they say, here's what I need you to do, you've got to run it through that reality check. Do we have the budget to do it? Do we have the time to do it? Do we have the staff to do it? If we don't, what is my contingency plan? And you've got to be able to educate the requester. Sir, ma'am, this is what you've asked. This is what we need to do. This is our current capability. This is what we would need to augment our staff, augment our budget, whatever it may be, to be able to get there. And you've got to be able to have that hard conversation. I go back to it again. To be a leader, you cannot be a yes person. You cannot just say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, no problem, we'll do it. Turn to your staff and say, this one's going to stink, you better figure it out. That is not a way to lead. what is the impact on the organization? Again, are you trying to be that fish that climbs a tree? Are you trying to ask your staff to do things that they're not capable of? I've heard stories galore of clerks where, as the departments or budgets kind of were impacted, departments were merged, and somebody will say, hey clerk, you're now in charge of this. Oh, by the way, you're taking on PIO duties. You're taking on the IT department. The finance director is going to report to you. If you don't know what's going on there, you've got to be able to tell that whoever it is, city manager, absolutely, I'm going to do what's best for the city, but give me some time to adjust to that. Let me find out from that individual what they need from me. Let me find out how they are best managed so that I can guarantee success. And remember that the good to great wasn't abysmal to great. It wasn't the analogy I gave earlier. It really is about taking an organization that is already good and transporting it to the land of great. There's three things that I think anyone can look at. Again, whether this is revitalizing your individual department or if this is you're just taking on a new department or a new role. Look for low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit sometimes is one of the biggest areas of frustrations for a department because they don't know why things aren't getting done. And each of us individually is going to have a blindness or a bias towards certain things. So you may not see that low-hanging fruit. Talk to your staff, talk to your peers, talk to your customers and say, hey, what things is it you want to see that gets done? And then high visibility changes. The biggest weakness I have as an individual is I'm a horrible cheerleader of myself. I love putting my staff in the front, letting them be successful, hiding in the back, whether I had anything to do with it or not. And sometimes that will harm me because I'm not making myself visible when some of that stuff happens. Well, this is kind of similar in that if you can make those high visibility changes that are for the better, you start building relationships with your peers. You start gaining trust where they say, hey, I saw this change that Arron made. I was a little hesitant at first, but I do see where things are going well. And then the peripheral jewels. Start looking for the diamond in the rough. Start talking again to everybody, finding out what your for you business majors, your BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goals are. What are you going to be able to do that is going to make life better for the public, make life better for your customers and other departments? What do we do when we get there? This is a two-part goal. You got to become and remain great. So for you clerks that have been doing this for 20, 30 years, I would ask you, what are you doing each year, every other year, to be able to look at your department and say, how can I revitalize this? How have we stagnated? Are we doing the same old thing we've always done? What do my customers need from me as an individual? And what do my customers need from this team? Another Marine Corps thought here, once the objective is secure, you're never going to give it back. So once you've reached that level of greatness, do you really want to let it slide into mediocre or let it slide into good? No, keep chasing great. Find out what it is that's going to get you there. And that's a bit early, but I had thought there would be a little more questions, so hopefully we've got some more.
All right, so I haven't received any other questions in the chat box except for one. So do you tell someone what you think their strengths and weaknesses are when you evaluate your team? Or do you ask them to kind of create a self-reflection? And if you've done both, what's one that you prefer to do?
Absolutely, you have to do both. And the reason you have to do both is you need to understand where they think they are and where you think they are. And as you discuss that, sometimes they're able to give you examples, and that's happened to me, where I've said, look, this is where I think your weakness may be. And they've been able to say, actually, I think I'm strong in that. Here is this example. Here's that example. And it goes back to that kind of being in the eye. There were things that I found out and this was a while back, but and a team member that was almost involved in everything. His name never came up. Nobody attributed their successes to him, but he was constantly there helping them along. And so I had no idea. I thought he had a weakness. And as he's giving all these examples of things they did, it did two things. One, it told me some of the people on my team were exaggerating their own individual accomplishments and accolades a bit. And the other one was it told me that I needed to spend more time with this individual to find out if maybe they had a bigger role. It is very important to understand where the individuals are for the reason of also helping them understand if they can't give you examples and there's nothing you were missing, you can give them examples and say, look, this is where I saw this item, or this is where that opportunity happened. The thing you want to be very careful about is comparison. So you don't want to say, well, Susie did it this way and Susie really does it better than most people do it. Be like Susie. You want to be able to say, look, this is my expectation. Susie may have set your expectation. Susie may be your model example, but you want to be able to say, this is where I expect you to be, and this is where you're falling short. Here are the examples of where you've fallen short, and here's what you and I are going to do together to get you to where you need to be.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have some comments about, can you provide some examples of what low-hanging fruit is, and what would you consider that? Okay,
I'll use IT when I came in here. The VPN one was a perfect one. It's very simple to do, to set up and kind of get people operating remotely. We had old Office. I mean, Flynn might smile at this, but everybody had a different version of Office. We had everything from Office 2010 to the latest at that version, I think was maybe 2016 or 2019. And getting everybody on the same page was very easy. We had software that you push some buttons and it literally pushes it out to everybody. It wasn't a hard thing to do. I just had to invest the work into getting the licensing, but everybody was instantly on the same version. It was huge across the board because nobody had to do the, oh, I don't have, my formatting is off because my version's different than yours. It's really that type of analysis. Let's see, what else? Flynn, you might be able to think of something else that when we...
I was just talking about thinking strategically, and that's looking at your low-hanging fruit. What does council want to get done, and what can you do quickly and easily? For us, relative to encouraging affordable housing, there's some quick and easy changes we can make to our zoning code to encourage that. Doesn't take time and money per se. I mean, it's something that you can do very quickly. So again, it's just looking at what are your council's priorities and what is available to you. What can you do quickly? What can you do easily? There's generally a couple of things always out there that are fairly easy to implement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then for both of you, or either of you, how do you encourage changes in a department where a director manages but does not lead?
That's what I do every day. When I got here, and the reason Flynn came to mind is because Flynn was one of the first department heads I worked with that was like, yeah, let's change, let's do better, let's find a way. We had one department head that every system we talked about, he went into detail about how it sucked. I mean, that was like, oh, that one sucks, that one sucks. It was kind of at a point, and Flynn, I know he's smiling because he knows who it was. It got to where I finally sat down with him and I said, all right, I'm done. I am not going to let you hold this city hostage. You've got two choices. You can get on board, or you can be the person that we all talk about, where we say, you refuse to get on board, but we're moving on. So you haven't given me an opinion on what system you liked. You said they all suck. That's the only thing you gave me. Could you please give me the three that sucked the least? That would really help me out. And he kind of laughed because I came at him point blank and he's like, all right, I get what you're saying. Like, well, these two were okay. So it really was that same thing. I'm not a confrontational person, but I'm also not somebody that's about to turn around when the confrontation's there. So I just go to them tactfully. And sometimes that individual needs to be, you need to be able to work with them, but also be able to let people that need to know that. We had a former department head that was also that way, and somehow it became my job to counsel that person, help them get better at what they were doing. And they would repeatedly say things like, well, it's clearly not me, which meant that, you know, I'm perfect, it's clearly somebody else. So we helped them to decide not to work here anymore.
You know, going forward with that, when you are a subordinate and, you know, there are things that you could identify that your department should be doing, but your director is either afraid or doesn't want to make the commitment of time, sometimes you can sit down with your director and say, hey, let's investigate this, or have you thought about investigating this? I'm more than happy to take on the responsibility of doing some of the background work and putting together a plan of how we could implement it. So it goes back to the skills of managing your manager, if you will, where you take on some of the responsibility. I know that doesn't sound like that's, you know, the preferable way to do things, but sometimes in order to get things done, you work with what you have and you move forward that way. So again, it's by taking on some of that responsibility, you can encourage change.
Yeah. This question goes perfectly with that one, Flynn. So on the other token, how do you recommend a director addresses their managers who may want to give too much assistance, even when it's not asked? So you're not having the micromanager, but you're having those micro helpers. How do you adjust that?
I think it goes back to the interpersonal relationships and making sure that you have time to sit down with your managers. Your managers also need to sit down with their personnel as well and have those back and forth conversations. It's important that you encourage your managers to do that. That when you meet with them, say, not only is it important for you to check on, you know, the status of projects and things like that, but it's important for you to get feedback from your staff members. And so having them take the opportunity to do that. Now, again, sometimes that's a challenge with certain managers that they may not be willing to do that, but those are the conversations you need to have with people. Again, let go a little bit. I have a person who was just promoted to assistant director of the department. Periodically, he and I will sit down and I will say, what do I need to let go of? And he will tell me because I will listen to him. He's a very capable individual. So when he tells me, Flynn, you don't need to do this any longer, then I back off. It goes the same thing with managers and those who report to them, that they need to have those conversations as well. Arron, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to piggyback on that, you've got to set that example first. One of the things I do with my direct reports is in our one-on-one meetings, I always end it with, what can I do better? What can I do to help you do your job better? And I want that of my managers, of the assistant director. I want them to be able to ask that same question of their staff without any inferences of, oh, I mean, I probably can't do anything better, right? You don't need to lead it. It needs to be very clear that I want to know how I can do my job better. And then the staff, they've really got to be in a position where they know they're protected, that they're able to do that. They're able to say, well, manager, since you asked, I'd love it if you weren't with your head over my shoulder while I'm writing a staff report. I feel confident that I'm able to do that on my own and take that advice.
Thank you. And then Arron, somebody had a question for you. Have you used any specific tools for you and your team to identify strengths and weaknesses as far as resources or some type of software maybe?
Yeah. We tried a couple of different tools and I hated them all.
What was the two that didn't suck so bad?
Well, the reason and the names will come to me, but one was a test and assessment. It was by IBM, I don't remember, and the other I'll have to get from the HR department. The reason I didn't like them is because, especially in a technology department, what you're doing today is not, again, relevant to tomorrow. So you got a test block or things like that that they're asking questions from. 6 months from now, those questions may not be relevant. Something else is new. And so what we kept finding is the individuals that have been doing this for a long time were excelling at those testing processes. The individuals that are up to date on the latest were not, because not only do you not do it the same way, sometimes you don't even do that anymore. So they're kind of past that. I'll get that to you, Ashton, what the name of that software was, and you can disperse it out to them.
I'll distribute it through listserv for all the clerks that are hearing.
The thing that worked for me, to answer that question, what's worked for me is getting involved and talking to my individual department members and getting from them where they're struggling, where their challenges are. Rarely does somebody not know that they're struggling in an area.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And then to either you or Flynn, how do you help your team members develop more of a management mindset to kind of get into that promotion if you know they have goals to promote, but they're not thinking big?
I'll go ahead and jump in there. I had a staff member who wanted to advance in the organization, but lacked some of the skills, didn't really have the background that he needed. What we did is we sat down and put together a development plan in terms of looking at the training that he needed, in terms of the technical background, looking at opportunities to present before the Planning Commission and the City Council, to do outreach, basically looking at all aspects in terms of the skills that he would need to advance. And over the course of about 8 months, we were able to check off all of those boxes along the way so that finally he was in a position where he could be promoted. He had the skills, he had the experience necessary, but it was by doing a detailed development plan with him that we were able to get him to where he needed to be. And so that's one of the ways that I've been able to help someone put themselves in a position where they could be promoted.
And mine's the same. It's investing in those individuals. If anyone asks me what my greatest projects or accomplishments are in my career, it's always going to be an individual's name. It's going to be that person that I came in that was the computer operator when I got there, that was a supervisor when I left, or it's going to be, we just promoted an individual to network engineer who a year and a half ago was not ready for that. And we have both spent time together kind of getting to where she needed to be in that position. I have no greater passion in my career than investing in people and succession planning of any kind. It was a hard adjustment for me when I got here to Palm Springs because it wasn't really the mentality of the city. And I am very much a do it or die trying individual, and I'm still alive and we're transitioning to succession planning. So that's where we're at.
Great, thank you. There's only a few more and then we're gonna wrap it up. So have either of you led a team that had members from different generations? What was your experience like and how did you handle issues that might have been internal?
I guess I'll start that one. That was one of the biggest struggles when I got here, was we had employees that had been here ranging from 30 years to relatively young, brand new individuals. And I don't know that generation really was as much of the issue as I've been here this long, therefore I am entitled. That was far more the issue because, some of my best employees have been a lot grayer and a lot balder than I am. And so I think it's less about that. It's understanding that individual. The generation does come into play, but where they see themselves in the organization, not where they are, where they see themselves in the organization is what seems to matter the most. And if they believe that you cannot function without them, they're going to act that way.
Thank you. So one more, I know we have a lot of questions coming in, but just with the time constraints here, this one's a pretty good one. So what would you do with a manager who has a hard time listening? He's always talking, no one ever feels heard, but he thinks he's a great listener. So how do you tell a bad listener that they suck at listening?
You say that. Just not those words. Go ahead, Flynn. I'm sure you got some ideas.
You know,
draw a picture. I just saw
it. I had a manager in Las Vegas, one of my managers, who pretty much could not let someone get a word in edgewise. He was a talker. When we would have our management team meetings, I had to pull him aside after a while and say, you know, you keep on interrupting people. You need to stop and let them finish their sentences. Because we had a good relationship to start with, and I think that's one of the keys, I could say something like that to him, and it got to the point where I could give him the look or the gesture, and he knew that he needed to cut it off. I think the key thing is you need to have a good relationship when you are telling people something that's uncomfortable, that this is coming from a place of love. We want to help you be effective, but you can't do that if you're always over talking people, as we used to say it. And so that's how I dealt with that in one situation, is again, having that conversation and then reinforcing that by some type of a shared signal that he knew that it was time to stop talking.
I think the relationship is the important part of how you can approach that, because if you don't have a great relationship with that person, that's trouble brewing, but you still have to have that conversation. Again, our job as leaders is to make sure that our staff all the way down the line feels valued, knows that they're important. There's no way they're going to feel that way if somebody's going to talk over them all the time. Yeah,
definitely. And just out of my experience, sometimes a person that thinks that they're not being heard isn't the one that's really listening. So make sure that you are a good listener as well, and you're not interjecting as well. Sometimes it's you in the room. So just because it's 2:55 for close to 3 o'clock, I want to, it's like the early out bell. Thank you so much, Arron and Flynn, for joining us today and giving us your insight and your experience and knowledge. We all really appreciate it. It's something that all clerks kind of go through as far as thinking like department heads and, you know, really managing that table. So we really appreciate it. For the clerks on the screen, thank you for being here today. I wish, like I said earlier, we were able to be in person. I definitely miss all of our conversations in person, and I can't wait to get back into our normal. This is the last session for today. If you guys are registered for tomorrow's session, it will begin exactly at 10 o'clock. That is with Allison and Jan. Those are for the ADA coordinator role and certifications. So if you are registered for that, don't miss that one. And then for assessments, I know that's a lot of questions. Go to the city clerks conference website. It's www.clerksrock.com. Underneath today's session, we'll have an assessment survey. You'll go ahead and complete that in order to get your points. There are the slides that we went through today through Arron and Flynn's presentations. They are not yet uploaded. We will get those worked to get those uploaded for you all. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to our president, Anthony Mejia. And other than that, we look forward to seeing you guys at other sessions. Once again, thank you so much, Arron and Flynn, and may all of you guys have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. And we feel your pain.
Yes, we do.
Thank you.